Obviously, the monarchy has gone through a lot of changes under Her Majesty's rule. One of them has been the fact that she has lost a lot of her own wealth and lands, right?
Well, it's relative, really. It's basically the 63-year reign has seen the rise of the super rich. These are the billionaire entrepreneurs, financiers, oil sheikhs. And basically, the Queen, whose wealth has largely been inherited from her family, has effectively stagnated in a relative sense. So we calculate that her fortune is about in the order of $425 million. But when you compare that against, the world's richest people today, that's, really a fraction of what they own compared to when she first ascended to the throne in 1952, when she was definitely one of the world's richest women.
Tom, can you provide us with details of the analysis based on asset classes?
Yeah, so the Queen's fortune, as we calculate, is probably a classic example of someone who's very asset rich, but relatively cash poor. So as I say, in total, we calculate she has a fortune of about 425 million, of which you've got 170 million in assets she inherited from her mother back in 2002. That's stuff like Fabergé eggs, furniture from her houses. She also owns a couple of estates, Sandringham and Balmoral. They're worth about $100 million. And I think it's the world's most valuable stamp collection, which comes in at about $75 million, plus 10 million odd worth of horses, and an investment portfolio we calculate around the $75 million mark.
How is it possible? I don't think a lot of people here, maybe in the U.S., get how the monarchy works, but Queen Elizabeth II is the supreme ruler of Great Britain by the divine intervention of God. I mean, how does she not own a healthy portion of that island?
Well, yeah, and she lives in Buckingham Palace, which, one property broker told me is worth about $3 billion at today's London property prices. But there's sort of a clear distinction in the UK between the monarchy as an institution, which is probably what people think of when they look at Buckingham Palace, the crown jewels, the Royal Art Collection, and then the Queen as an individual, i.e. her personal fortune, what she's able to pass on to her family outside of their use, but not ownership of stuff like Buckingham Palace. Yeah.
So, but Tom, isn't there essentially an agreement that the monarchy has signed with England, with the people of England, saying we'll sort of rule over these assets, but you can actually own them in deed in exchange for basically an annual allowance?
Yeah, exactly. It's called the sovereign grant. So basically, Queen Elizabeth's predecessors a few hundred years ago effectively gave up all the crown assets, which is the Buckingham Palaces, the British seabed, and instead they now get about 15% of all the profits from those assets. But pretty much all that income effectively goes to running the monarchy. So she has a huge payroll she needs to pay for, obviously, the upkeep of the palaces. So she gets about £40 million a year from this profit sharing, but that pretty much goes straight out the door every year. And in fact, so some people are saying it's maybe not even enough, because some of the palaces are sort of falling into disrepair on some levels.
Tom, the royal stamp collection is something that you mentioned, and it's been handed down from her, from her father and grandfather. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's basically the world's most valuable collection. It's got all sorts of oddities and interests. So she owns two stamps which basically have a face value of 13p, and the other stamp went on auction recently, and that sold for about, I think, £300,000. So it's a huge increase in value there. And as an aside, so her father and her grandfather are very keen stamp collectors, and basically they built up the collection, which I believe has a copy of every single British stamp in existence.
Yes.
But the Queen itself, or herself, sorry, isn't actually that much of a fan, hasn't really added to the collection during her tenure.
And they issued a special stamp in Britain to commemorate her years on the throne, in purple.
Yeah, I imagine that would probably for the Diamond Jubilee back in 2012, and today's sort of the day she becomes Britain's longest reigning monarch. So she's now been on the throne, as of today, for 63 years and 216 days. So she's just overtaken her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria.
She is very popular in England, but what about the monarchy itself? I mean, what's the likelihood that this monarchy survives another few generations?
Oh, it's in rude health. There was a poll recently which I think showed something like 80% of British people, like the monarchy and want it to stay, and a similar percentage rate the Queen very highly. So she's kind of, the monarchy's seen all sorts of turmoil, the dissolution of the British Empire, more recently, Princess Diana, and a whole series of sort of family strife. But the Queen has sort of been a steady hand over these last 6 decades, and leaves it in great health.